At the airport, my daughter leaned down and whispered to Grandpa, "Just stay here, we'll be back soon." Then they walked toward the departure gate without looking back. My father had spent $22,000, his entire life savings, to take us on this trip. But I had seen the boarding passes. 4 tickets. Not 5. Only Grandpa's was missing. In that moment, I was stunned. My heart felt like it was tightening. Everything I knew about my family had collapsed, and I had to make a choice that would change my life forever. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments below, and let me know. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Your story matters, and I read every single comment. It helps me understand what resonates with you most. Also, please note, this narrative contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarities to actual names or locations are coincidental. However, the lessons I'm sharing may offer valuable insights for your own journey. My father spent his entire life savings $22,000 to take his family on one last trip. Not for himself, for love, for memory, for the woman he'd lost 5 years earlier, and they left him at the airport like he was nothing. Let me take you back to that morning. October 15th, 2023. The day I learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who stays. The fog was so thick that morning you could barely see the terminal lights at Millbrook Regional Airport. It clung to everything heavy and cold, like it was trying to hide something. Dad sat in his wheelchair gripping a photograph of Mom, the one taken in Santorini back in 1965. His fingers trembled, not from the chill, but from anticipation. He'd been talking about this trip for months. Ever since his 79th birthday, when he'd gathered us all in the living room and pulled out that old shoebox of black and white photos. Young faces, white buildings, blue sea. "This is where I met your mother," he'd said, his voice catching on the memory. "Before I turn 80, I want to go back. One last time. And I want all of you there with me." Catherine had smiled. Amanda had hugged him. Scott had nodded. And I'd promised. Dad had written the check himself. $22,000 from the hardware store savings account. Enough to cover flights, hotels, meals for all 5 of us. He'd handed it to Amanda with shaking hands and said, "This is my gift to you, so we can all be together where it started." I should have known something was wrong when Amanda took over the planning. She'd insisted on handling everything, the bookings, the itinerary, the flight arrangements. Catherine had supported her. Scott hadn't objected. And I'd been too busy with work to question it. That morning at the airport, Amanda pushed Dad's wheelchair through the automatic doors. The fog swallowed us whole. Inside the terminal was bright and cold fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Dad kept looking around, searching for the departure boards, clutching Mom's photo like a lifeline. Amanda leaned down, her voice sweet as honey. "Grandpa, just wait here, okay? I'll go check us all in." She smiled. The kind of smile I'd seen 1,000 times. The kind that said, "Trust me." I stood beside Dad, watching her walk toward the ticket counter with Catherine and Scott trailing behind. Something felt off. The way they huddled together. The way they kept glancing back at us. The way Catherine's jaw was set, like she was bracing for something. Dad looked up at me. "This is it, son. We're really going." I forced a smile. "Yeah, Dad, we're really going." But when Amanda came back 10 minutes later, she wasn't smiling anymore. "There's been a system error," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Only 4 boarding passes went through." I stared at her. "What do you mean, 4? She glanced at Dad, then back at me. Her voice dropped quieter now, like she was trying to soften the blow. "Grandpa can barely move, Dad. Taking him on this trip would just slow everyone down. I've already arranged for a care facility to pick him up." The words didn't land right away. They hung in the air, suspended in the fog that had followed us inside. Catherine stepped forward, her expression calm, practiced. "It's for the best, Sinclair. He'll be more comfortable there." Scott said nothing. He just stared at his phone, thumbs moving across the screen, refusing to meet Dad's confused gaze. I looked at my father, at the man who'd taught me how to fix a carburetor when I was 12, who'd stayed up all night helping me study for exams, who'd given me the down payment for my first house, who'd spent his entire life savings so we could all watch a sunset together in the place where his love story began. And I looked at my wife, my daughter, my son, standing there in their travel clothes, boarding passes in hand, ready to leave. "You're serious," I said. Amanda's eyes hardened. "The facility's already on the way. We can't miss this flight. He paid for this trip. And we'll take pictures for him," Catherine said. "He'll understand." But Dad didn't understand. He looked up at me, his face crumpling in confusion. "Son, where are they going?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't find the words. Catherine touched my arm. "Sinclair, we need to go through security. Now." And then they walked away. Toward the departure gates. Toward Greece. Toward the sunset Dad had paid for them to see. Not one of them looked back. The terminal speakers crackled. "Final boarding call for Flight 447 to Athens. Gate 12. Dad's hand found mine. His grip was weak, his skin paper thin. Did I do something wrong? I knelt beside his wheelchair, my throat tight. I could still see them at the security checkpoint. Amanda was laughing at something Scott had said. Catherine was checking her watch. They weren't coming back. Dad held up the photograph. Mom's face, young and bright, frozen in time. "She would have wanted us all to be there," he whispered. The boarding call echoed again. 5 minutes until the gate closed. 5 minutes to decide. I could run, catch up to them, get on that plane, pretend this hadn't happened. Pretend I hadn't just watched my family abandon my father like he was a piece of luggage they didn't want to carry. Or I could stay. I looked at Dad, at the man who'd never left me. Not once. I stood up. I turned away from the departure gates, and I made the choice that would change everything. But before I tell you what I chose that morning, you need to understand something. You need to know who my father was. Not the frail man in the wheelchair. The man who built everything with his own 2 hands. I was 8 years old the first time Dad let me help at the store. Crowley Hardware, a little shop on Main Street that always smelled like sawdust and machine oil. He handed me a lock and 2 small picks. "Hold this steady, son," he said, showing me how to work the pins. A lock isn't just metal. It's trust. People trust us to keep their families safe. Don't ever forget that. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Trust. That's what he taught me. And that's what they broke. Sometimes we'd work late, just the 2 of us. Mom would bring dinner to the shop. Dad would teach me how to fix hinges, repair door frames, sand down rough edges until they were smooth. "Every piece of wood has a story, Sinclair," he'd say. "Our job is to listen." He was strong back then, not just physically. He had this quiet confidence, the kind that came from knowing his hands could fix almost anything. Customers would come in with broken cabinets, stuck windows, rusted locks, and Dad would solve it. Every time. "Your grandfather built this store with nothing," he told me once, tightening a screw on an old hinge. "Worked 3 jobs to save enough for the lease. He believed in making things last. I'm teaching you the same thing." And he did. For years I watched him work. Watched him measure twice and cut once. Watched him shake hands with customers and mean it. Watched him close-up shop every night and come home smelling like lumber and effort. That was the man I knew. The man who taught me that integrity wasn't something you talked about. It was something you did. 3 months before that morning at the airport, Dad called a family meeting. He was 79 then, still walking on his own. Slower maybe, but steady. He opened a wooden box and pulled out a stack of old photographs. The first one made me catch my breath, a young woman in a white sundress standing on a cliffside. Behind her, the endless blue of the Aegean Sea. She was laughing, her hair caught in the wind. Santorini, 1965. Dad said quietly. I was 21. Your mother was 22. We were on separate tours, both got lost trying to find a lighthouse, ended up at the same cafe asking for directions in broken Greek. He traced his finger along the photo, smiling. She ordered loukoumades, honey pastries. She shared them with me. We sat on that cliff for 4 hours watching the sunset. I didn't speak much Greek. She didn't speak much English. But we didn't need words. We just knew. His eyes were wet. 2 years later, we got married. 48 years together. It's been 5 years since she left. He looked around the room at all of us. Catherine leaned forward. Amanda's expression was soft, attentive. Scott nodded along his phone, face down on the table for once. Before I turn 80, Dad continued. I want to go back there. One last time. I want to stand where we first held hands. I want to see that sunset again. And I want all of you there with me, because family is all I have left. He placed a check on the table. $22,000. His entire life savings from 40 years of running that hardware store. I've been saving this for something that matters. This trip, this memory, that's what matters. I'll cover everything. Flights, hotels, meals. This is my gift to you. My last wish before I turn 80. Catherine's eyes lit up. Dad, that's so generous. Of course we'll go. Amanda rushed over and hugged him. Grandpa, this is amazing. We're going to make so many memories together. Scott nodded. Thanks, Grandpa. That's really kind of you. But I just sat there holding Dad's hand, feeling the weight of what he'd just given us. Not the money. A piece of his heart. I should have known then. The way Amanda hugged him too tight, too perfect, like she was performing. The way Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. The way Scott glanced at his phone the second Dad looked away. But I was too busy remembering my father from before. Strong, capable. The man who taught me that trust was everything. I didn't see that trust was exactly what they were about to destroy. That night, after everyone had gone home, I found Dad in the living room, staring at Mom's photograph. The same one from Santorini. She was frozen there, young and bright, laughing on that cliffside. Do you think she'd be proud of me, son? He asked. For going back. I told him yes. I told him she'd be watching from wherever she was smiling. I had no idea that 3 months later I'd be the only one standing beside him. That the people who promised to make memories would be the ones trying to erase him. Dad set the photo down gently, like it might break. You know, Sinclair, when your mother and I stood on that cliff, she made me promise something. What was it? I asked. He looked at me, his eyes steady. She said, Robert, when we're old, don't let me fade away alone. Don't let me become invisible. I promised her I wouldn't. And I kept that promise. Every day until she passed, I made sure she knew she mattered. He paused, his voice cracking just slightly. Now I'm the one getting old. And I just want to go back to where it started. To remember what it felt like to be seen. I squeezed his hand. Dad, we're all going to be there. You won't be alone. He smiled. But there was something in his eyes. Something I didn't understand then. Fear, not of dying, not of flying, but of being left behind. And 3 months later, standing in that airport watching my wife and children walk away from him like he was nothing, I finally understood. He'd been afraid of this all along. Afraid that the people he loved most would stop seeing him. That he'd become invisible. That the trust he'd built his entire life on would crumble. And he'd been right. The morning we left for the airport, The fog was so thick, you couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead. It clung to the windows like a warning I didn't know how to read. By the time I understood what it meant, it was almost too late. 3 months of planning had led to this morning, October 15th, departure day. The alarm went off at 5:30. Outside, the world was still dark, wrapped in a blanket of fog so dense it looked like the house was floating in clouds. I helped Dad into his wheelchair. He'd been using it for the past 4 months, ever since his legs stopped holding him steady. "Saw a big day, son," he said, eyes bright despite the early hour. "I can't believe we're really going," I forced a smile. "Me neither, Dad." Amanda arrived first, wearing a designer jacket and perfect makeup despite the ungodly hour. "Good morning, Grandpa," she chirped, leaning down to kiss his cheek. "Are you excited?" Dad beamed. "More than you know, sweetheart." She took the wheelchair handles from me. "I've got him, Dad. You focus on the luggage." Something about the way she said it, too bright, too eager, made my stomach twist. But I brushed the feeling aside. Catherine pulled into the driveway moments later. Scott climbed out of the passenger seat, headphones already on, staring at his phone. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked at Dad. They just started loading suitcases into the trunk, like this was any other trip. I watched Amanda fuss over Dad adjusting his blanket, smoothing his collar. Too attentive. Too perfect. Like she was performing for an audience that wasn't there. "Ready?" Catherine asked, her voice flat. I nodded and helped Dad into the back seat. Amanda slid in beside him. I took the other side. Scott stayed up front, his music loud enough that I could hear the bass through his headphones. Catherine drove. The fog pressed against the windshield, thick and impenetrable. The headlights barely cut through it. For a while, nobody spoke. Just the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of Scott's music. Dad held Mom's photograph against his chest. The one from Santorini. The one he'd been carrying everywhere since the trip was booked. "She would have loved this, wouldn't she, son?" he said quietly. "Yeah, Dad, she would have." I glanced at Catherine in the rearview mirror. She and Amanda exchanged a look. Quick, almost imperceptible. But I saw it. A silent conversation I wasn't part of. My chest tightened. "Everything okay?" I asked. Catherine's eyes flicked back to the road. "Fine. Just tired." But her hands gripped the wheel too tightly. Her jaw was set, like she was bracing for something. I looked at Amanda. She was staring out the window, her expression blank. Not excited, not nervous, just waiting. Scott shifted in his seat and checked his watch, then checked it again 30 seconds later. "You got somewhere to be?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He didn't look up. "Just don't want to miss the flight." "We're 2 hours early," I said. He shrugged and went back to his phone. The fog didn't lift. If anything, it got worse the closer we got to Millbrook Regional Airport. By the time we pulled into the parking lot, the terminal lights looked like ghosts floating in the mist. Catherine parked. Scott was out of the car before she even turned off the engine. Amanda stayed close to Dad, smiling that too bright smile again. "Let me get the wheelchair, Grandpa," she said. I started to help, but she waved me off. "Dad, you get the bags. I've got him." Inside the terminal was quiet. A handful of travelers milled around, dragging suitcases, sipping coffee. The high ceilings made every sound echo. Amanda pushed Dad's wheelchair toward a row of seats near the windows. "Grandpa, why don't you wait here?" she said, pointing to a bench. "I'll go check us all in. It'll be faster that way." Dad nodded, trusting. "Thank you, sweetheart." She smiled and disappeared into the crowd. I stood beside Dad, watching her go. Catherine and Scott hung back, not speaking, not looking at him. Just standing there like they were waiting for something. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Dad hummed softly. An old jazz tune he used to play on the radio at the hardware store. "So Sinclair," he said suddenly. "Do you think the sunset will still look the same after all these years?" I think it'll be even better, I told him. But inside, something was clawing at me. The way Amanda had smiled. The way Catherine wouldn't meet my eyes. The way Scott kept checking his watch like he was counting down to something. Dad squeezed my hand. Thank you for making this happen, son. This means everything to me. My throat tightened. You're the one who paid for it, Dad. This is your dream. No, he said quietly. My dream is having all of you here with me. I looked at him, at the man who'd spent his entire life building things, teaching me how to fix locks and sand wood and shake hands with honesty, the man who'd saved every dollar for 40 years so we could stand together on a cliff in Greece and watch a sunset. And I looked at my family, at Catherine standing 10 feet away, arms crossed, at Scott staring at his phone, at Amanda somewhere in the crowd doing God knows what. Something was wrong. I felt it in my bones, but I didn't know what. Not yet. Dad sat beside me, clutching Mom's photograph, smiling. He had no idea what was about to happen, and neither did I. But I was about to learn that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. 20 minutes. That's how long it took for me to realize my family had just abandoned my father at an airport terminal. 20 minutes that changed who I was forever. 10 minutes became 15. Dad shifted in his wheelchair, restless. His fingers traced the edges of Mom's photograph, the one from Santorini, the one he'd been carrying like a talisman since we'd booked this trip. Where'd they go, son? They'll be right back, Dad. Check-in line's probably long. But there was no long line. I could see the counter from where we sat. It was nearly empty. Dad hummed that jazz tune again, softly, like he was trying to fill the silence, trying to convince himself everything was fine. But I could see it in his eyes, the worry creeping in, the confusion, the fear that maybe something wasn't right. 15 minutes became 20. My chest tightened. I stood up, unable to sit still anymore. Dad, I'll be right back. I'm going to check on them. Okay, son. His voice was small, trusting. They're probably just taking care of things. I walked to the check-in desk, my legs heavy, my heart pounding. The agent looked up, smiling politely. Can I help you, sir? Has the Crowley party checked in yet for the flight to Santorini 5 passengers? She tapped at her keyboard. Click, click, click. Yes, sir. I show 4 passengers checked in about 20 minutes ago. Flight begins boarding in 15 minutes at gate 12. 4, not 5, 4. The word hit me like a fist to the chest. The terminal tilted sideways. My vision blurred at the edges. I ran back to Dad, my shoes squeaking on the polished floor, my breath coming in short gasps. He was still sitting there, Mom's photograph resting on his lap, humming that jazz tune. Waiting, trusting, Sinclair. He looked up at me, hopeful. Did you find them? I couldn't speak. I just knelt beside his wheelchair, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. That's when I saw them, Amanda, Catherine, Scott, walking toward gate 12, rolling carry-ons trailing behind them. Not one of them looked back. Not once. I stood up. Stay here, Dad. I moved fast, cutting through the crowd. I reached them just as they were about to enter the gate area. What are you doing? Amanda turned, her expression perfectly calibrated. Dad, I thought you'd figured it out by now. Figured out what? She sighed. Grandpa can barely move. Taking him on this trip would just slow everyone down. He can't climb stairs, can't walk on cobblestones. It's not practical. Like my father was a piece of luggage that didn't fit the overhead compartment. He paid for this trip, I said, my voice shaking. Every cent, $22,000, his entire life savings. Which is exactly why we should enjoy it. Catherine cut in. Sinclair, be reasonable. I've arranged for a care facility to pick him up within the hour. He'll be more comfortable there than struggling through Greece. Reasonable? comfortable. All the words people use when they want to make cruelty sound logical. Scott didn't even look at me. He just stood there staring at his boarding pass, waiting for this conversation to be over. I turned around. Across the terminal, Dad sat alone in his wheelchair. Travelers rushed past him. Nobody saw him. He was invisible, just an old man in a wheelchair. An inconvenience. He looked so small, so confused, still clutching Mom's photograph, still waiting for us to come back, still trusting. I looked back at them. The wife I'd lived with for 28 years. My daughter who used to sit on my lap for bedtime stories. My son who I'd taught to ride a bike, and they were walking away. "Sinclair, come on," Catherine called, already moving toward the gate. "It's boarding time." I took a deep breath, and I felt something settle inside me. Something hard. Something final. "I'm not going." Amanda stopped. "What?" "I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying with Dad. We're going home." Catherine's eyes hardened. "Sinclair, don't be ridiculous." "Ridiculous." I stepped closer, my voice low. "You just abandoned an 80-year-old man in a wheelchair. A man who gave you everything, who paid for you to see the place where his wife, your mother Catherine, fell in love with him. And you left him like garbage." Amanda's face flushed red. "Dad, you're making a scene." "No. You made the scene when you turned your backs on him." The gate agent's voice crackled over the speakers. "Final boarding call for Flight 447 to Athens Gate 12. Catherine's jaw tightened. She glanced at Amanda, then at Scott. Then she turned back to me, her eyes cold. "Fine, stay, but don't expect us to wait for you. I wouldn't dream of it." I turned my back on them, walked toward Dad. Each step felt lighter, like I was shedding weight with every footfall. Behind me, I heard the gate agent calling the last passengers aboard. I didn't look back. I reached Dad's wheelchair, knelt down in front of him. "Dad, we're not going to Santorini." His face crumpled. "But the trip. You paid so much. You paid Dad, and they just threw you away like you were nothing." My voice cracked. "But you're not nothing to me, so we're going home. Just you and me." His eyes filled with tears. "Son, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do, because somebody has to stay, and that somebody is me." He reached up his hand, shaking, and gripped my wrist. "Thank you," he whispered. I pushed Dad's wheelchair toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open. Outside, the fog was lifting, sunlight breaking through in thin golden streaks. Behind us, the final boarding call for Santorini echoed through the terminal one last time. They were on that plane. My wife, my children. Flying toward a sunset my father had dreamed of for months. A sunset he'd paid for with 40 years of honest work. And we were getting into a taxi. The driver helped me fold the wheelchair into the trunk. Dad sat in the back seat, still holding Mom's photograph. I slid in beside him. As we pulled away from the airport, I looked back one last time. The terminal was fading into the distance. The fog was gone, now burned away by the morning sun. But inside me, something darker was beginning to settle. A cold, creeping realization. What kind of people abandon a man who gave them everything? And how long had they been planning this? 75 minutes. That's how long it took to drive from Millbrook Regional Airport back home. 75 minutes that felt like a millennium. 75 minutes I spent imagining what would have happened if I'd gotten on that plane. If I'd left Dad sitting there alone, waiting for someone who would never come back. The taxi smelled like stale coffee and synthetic air freshener. Outside, the last of the fog was burning off, revealing a clear blue sky. But inside my head, everything was getting darker. The shadows were closing in. Dad sat beside me in the back seat, staring out the window in silence. He didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Just watched the world blur past in a stream of colors and shapes. Strip malls with flickering neon signs. fast food joints with empty parking lots, suburban houses with neat lawns and closed curtains. Mom's photograph still rested on his lap, held gently in his weathered hands. His fingers traced the edges over and over like a prayer, like a meditation, like he was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. I kept replaying it in my mind. The check-in counter. 4 passengers, not 5. Amanda's face when I confronted her, that perfectly calibrated expression of surprise. The way Catherine had looked at me like I was being unreasonable, like I was the problem. The way Scott hadn't looked at me at all, just stared at his phone like nothing was happening. 6 months ago, Dad could still walk. Slowly, carefully, with a cane, but he could walk. We used to go to the hardware store together every Saturday morning, the one he'd owned and sold 5 years earlier, but still visited like an old friend returning home. He'd run his hand along the lumber displays, remembering which brands held up best in wet weather. He'd chat with the new owner about hinges and locks and the right way to sandpine without damaging the grain. Then he started falling. Once in the kitchen while making breakfast. Once on the front porch steps reaching for the newspaper. The third time he couldn't get back up on his own. He'd lain there for 20 minutes before I found him. When it's just age, the doctor had said, scribbling notes on his clipboard. Muscle deterioration, loss of balance. It happens to everyone eventually, but it had happened so fast, too fast. That's when Amanda volunteered. "I'll help take care of Grandpa," she'd said, her voice filled with concern. "I'll stop by every morning before work. Make sure he takes his vitamins. Keep him company." I'd been grateful, relieved even. I worked long hours managing logistics at the freight company, often leaving before dawn and returning after dark. Having Amanda help felt like a blessing, like family doing what family was supposed to do. Every morning for 2 months she came, brought him tea with honey, gave him his pills lined up in a little tray, smiled and talked about her interior design projects, about fabrics and color palettes. And every week that passed, Dad got weaker. His hands trembled more. His voice became quieter. His eyes grew more confused. I thought it was just the progression of age, the inevitable decline we all face eventually. Now, sitting in this taxi watching the miles roll past, I wasn't so sure. 2 months ago, I'd overheard Catherine on the phone in the garage. I was bringing in groceries from the car when I heard her voice through the door, sharp and clear. "When this trip is over, we can finally move forward. We won't have to keep pretending anymore." I'd assumed she was talking about work, about one of her complicated real estate deals. Now those words echoed differently in my mind. They took on a darker meaning. Move forward, stop pretending. "Did I do something wrong, son?" Dad's voice was so small, so broken, it shattered my heart into pieces. "So what? No, Dad." I must have done something wrong, something terrible. They wouldn't leave me like that unless I did something wrong. I gripped his hand tight, feeling how fragile it had become. "You did everything right, Dad. Everything. You gave them everything you had. This isn't about you. It's about them. They're the ones who are wrong here." But even as I said it, trying to comfort him, the pieces were starting to fit together in my mind, like a horrible puzzle. The vitamin bottles, Amanda's daily visits, Dad's sudden decline. What if it wasn't age at all? We pulled into the driveway at 10:15. I paid the driver, helped Dad back into his wheelchair, and pushed him up the wooden ramp I'd installed 4 months earlier. The house looked the same as when we'd left it that morning, but it felt different now. Hollow, empty. Like something vital had been ripped out and could never be replaced. I helped Dad into his room. He was exhausted, both emotionally and physically drained. He lay down without even changing clothes, still clutching Mom's photograph against his chest. "Will you stay with me for a bit, son? As long as you want, Dad. I'm not going anywhere." I sat beside the bed in the old wooden chair until he fell asleep, his breathing slow and steady. Then I stood quietly, preparing to leave. That's when I saw them. The pill bottles on his nightstand, 5 of them all neatly labeled. Vitamin D, calcium, B12. I picked one up, shook it gently. The pills inside rattled, but something was off. Wrong. The label was too perfect, too professional, like it had been printed at home on expensive paper. I unscrewed the cap, looked at the pills closely. They didn't look like the vitamins I took every morning. The coating was different, smoother, almost glossy. A terrible thought crept in like poison. What if abandoning him at the airport was just the final step? What if they'd been hurting him all along? I slipped one pill into my pocket. Tomorrow I'd find out what it really was. The next morning, I found the truth hiding in plain sight. In a box beneath Amanda's old bed. In a file folder tucked inside Catherine's desk. In the pill bottles that were supposed to help my father, but were slowly taking away everything he had left. I woke at dawn. If you could call it waking when you'd never really slept. My eyes had been open most of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 6 months in my mind. Dad was still asleep in his room, his breathing slow and deep and steady. I slipped in quietly and carefully took one of the pill bottles from his nightstand, trying not to disturb him. In the harsh kitchen light, I examined it closely. The label looked professional, printed on quality paper. Vitamin D3, 2000 IU. Take 1 daily with food. But when I unscrewed the cap and poured a single pill into my palm, something felt wrong. Something I couldn't quite name. The pill was pale blue, smooth, unmarked. No identifying codes or letters. Real vitamin D always has markings stamped into the surface. Manufacturer codes. Batch numbers. These were completely blank, like someone had tried to erase their origin. I went upstairs to Amanda's old bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest. She'd moved out 2 years ago when she got her own apartment downtown, but she'd left some things behind. Boxes of memories, pieces of her past. I opened her closet slowly, searched through boxes of old design samples and fabric swatches, college textbooks and framed photographs. At the bottom of one dusty box, buried beneath layers of fabric, I found a small plastic container. No label. No markings. Inside were dozens of pale blue pills, identical to the ones Dad was taking every single morning. Beside them was a crumpled receipt, folded and hidden. PharmaDirect Online, muscle relaxant prescription required. Quantity 180, $240. My hands started shaking. The receipt slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. I drove to Dr. Patricia Reynolds' office before it even opened, sitting in my car in the empty parking lot. She arrived at 8:30, surprised and concerned, to find me waiting by her door. "Claire, what's wrong? Is your father okay?" I handed her the pill, my hand trembling. "I need you to test this. Urgent. Tell me exactly what it is." She frowned, studying it under the morning light. "Where did you get this?" "My father's been taking them. Every single day for months. My daughter said they were vitamins. She gave them to him herself." Her expression changed immediately. Concern turned to alarm. "I'll send it to the lab right now. Give me 2 hours. Wait here." While I waited, I sat in my car in that parking lot and tried to think clearly. 2 years ago, Dad had started having occasional moments of forgetfulness. Small things, forgetting to lock doors, leaving the stove on after making coffee. Concerned, I'd installed a small security camera in his room. Just a precaution. Just to monitor him while I was at work, to make sure he was safe. It was hidden in the bookshelf between 2 thick volumes of history books. Tiny lens. Motion activated. It saved all footage automatically to a hard drive in my office closet. I'd forgotten about it completely. I'd stopped checking the footage after the first few months when everything seemed fine, when Dad seemed healthy and independent. But it had been recording all along, every single day, every visitor who entered that room. Every morning, Amanda came by with her cheerful smile and her tea and her poisonous pills. Oh God, oh my God. At noon, Dr. Reynolds called my cell phone. Her voice was tight. "Sinclair, you need to come back here. Right now. Don't wait." I was there in 10 minutes, breaking every speed limit. She handed me a printed lab report, her face grave and pale. "Sinclair, this isn't vitamin D. This isn't even close. It's a neuromuscular blocking agent, specifically a type of muscle relaxant used only in surgical settings, administered intravenously under strict medical supervision." "What does that mean?" My voice sounded distant, like someone else was speaking. "If taken orally over a prolonged period, it causes progressive muscle weakness, loss of motor control, difficulty walking, eventually complete paralysis of the lower extremities." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sinclair, where exactly did your father get this medication?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed. My vision blurred at the edges. "Stiko, this isn't medicine," she continued quietly. "This is a harmful substance being administered without medical oversight. If someone intentionally gave this to him knowing what it would do..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. I sat in my car outside her office, the pieces falling into place like dominoes. 6 months ago, Amanda started helping with Dad. He took his vitamins every morning from her hands. 5 months ago, Dad started stumbling, catching himself on furniture. 4 months ago, Dad needed a cane to walk safely. 3 months ago, Dad couldn't walk at all. He needed a wheelchair. 2 months ago, Amanda stopped visiting as often. "He's stabilized now," she'd said. 1 month ago, they planned the Santorini trip Dad had paid for with his life savings. They needed him weak. They needed him helpless. They needed him in that wheelchair. They needed him to be too much of a burden to bring along on the dream vacation he'd paid for, so they could abandon him without guilt, so they could justify leaving him behind. My daughter had poisoned my father. Slowly, methodically, deliberately, for months. She'd smiled at him every morning, brought him tea with honey, told him she loved him, asked about his day, and the entire time she was destroying him from the inside, cell by cell, muscle by muscle. I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. But as I pulled into the driveway, I remembered something important: the camera. The hidden camera I'd installed 2 years ago and completely forgotten about. It had recorded everything. Every single morning visit, every pill Amanda gave him, every smile, every lie, every betrayal. I had evidence. Concrete, undeniable evidence. The camera had been recording for 2 years. 730 days of film. Most of it mundane. Dad reading the paper, napping in his favorite chair, watching TV. But buried deep in those hundreds of hours of ordinary life, I found something that changed everything. I found proof this wasn't just cruelty. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, and they'd been executing it for months. That night, I locked myself in my office. Dad was asleep down the hall, his breathing steady and peaceful. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood settling, and I started watching. 2 years, 730 days. The hard drive held it all, stored in neat folders, organized by date. I started scrubbing through the footage quickly. Most of it was ordinary. Dad sitting by the window watching birds, reading his favorite mystery novels, dozing in his chair with the newspaper across his lap, watching old black and white movies. Then I reached 6 months ago. April. The camera angle showed Dad's nightstand perfectly capturing everything in clear detail. And every morning at 7:30, Amanda appeared like clockwork. April 12th, 7:32 a.m. Amanda walked in with a bright smile plastered across her face. Good morning, Grandpa. Time for your vitamins. She opened the pill bottle sitting on the nightstand. But before she gave him one, she turned slightly toward the window, her back blocking his view completely. Her hands moved. Quick. Practiced. Rehearsed. She swapped the real vitamin bottle for another one from her purse, poured a pale blue pill into her palm, handed it to Dad with a glass of water. Here you go. This will keep you strong and healthy. Dad swallowed it without question, trusting her completely. She did this every single morning for 2 months straight. I kept scrolling through the footage, my stomach churning. July 28th, 11:47 p.m. Dad was asleep in his chair, but not a natural sleep. His head lolled to one side, mouth slightly open. His breathing was too deep, too slow, too heavy. The door creaked open slowly. Catherine, Amanda, Scott, all three of them. Catherine carried a tray with a teacup, steam rising from it. Make sure he drinks all of this, she whispered urgently. They woke him gently, carefully. Dad, drink this. It'll help you sleep better tonight. He drank it, confused but compliant, always trusting. 15 minutes later, his eyes glazed over. His movements became sluggish. Amanda pulled out a folder from her bag. Documents. A pen. She spread them across the coffee table. Hold his hand steady, Catherine instructed quietly, her voice cold and businesslike. Amanda guided Dad's limp hand across the page. Once. Then again. 4 signatures total, each one more shaky than the last. I paused the video. Zoomed in as far as the resolution would allow. The documents were clear enough to read. Last will and testament of Robert Crowley. Property transfer document. Power of attorney. All listing Amanda as primary beneficiary. They didn't know the camera had audio recording capability. Amanda laughing softly, almost giggling. When he's gone, we won't have to deal with this wheelchair situation anymore. No nursing home bills draining everything. No caregivers. Just clean. Scott sounding uncomfortable and hesitant. Are you sure this is legal? What if someone questions it? Catherine confident and dismissive. It's his signature. We witnessed it properly. Nobody will question it. Nobody will even look twice. Amanda, her voice casual. What about Dad? Meaning me. He's too soft. Won't suspect a thing. Never has. Never will. I stopped playback. My hands were shaking violently. Not from fear, something colder. Rage. Pure, controlled rage building inside my chest. They'd planned this. Not just the airport abandonment. Not just the trip. They'd been systematically stripping him of everything for months. His health, his autonomy, his property, his dignity, his very independence. And they'd used his trust, the thing he'd taught me to value, above almost everything, as a weapon against him. I kept searching frantically. There was another camera I'd completely forgotten about. The one in the living room, hidden behind a picture frame near the bookshelf. I'd installed it years ago to monitor the front door for security. August 20th, 10:15 p.m. Dad had gone to bed early, exhausted. The three of them sat on the couch, wine glasses in hand, speaking in low voices that the microphone barely captured. Catherine, matter of fact. So we're agreed. We leave the old man at the airport. Amanda nodded eagerly. Cleanest way. No paperwork. No legal hassle. We just don't bring him along. Tell airport staff he's confused, wandered off somewhere. By the time anyone asks questions, we'll be in Santorini enjoying his money. Scott, uncertain. What if Dad doesn't agree? What if he makes a scene? Amanda's laugh was cold and sharp. Sinclair. He won't suspect a thing. He's too trusting, too soft, too naive. He'll believe whatever we tell him. He always has. Always will. I replayed that line 3 times, each word cutting deeper. He's too soft. He'll believe whatever we tell him. They'd been right. I had believed them. Every word, every smile, every false promise. I'd been so focused on being a good husband, a good father, that I'd been completely blind to what they really were underneath. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated how far a son will go to protect his father. I stood up from my chair. My hands stopped shaking. My vision cleared. And something settled inside me. Something hard. Something final. Something immovable. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd never know the truth. They thought trust made me powerless. But they were wrong about everything. I wasn't weak. I was patient. And now I had everything I needed. Not revenge. Revenge is emotional, messy, uncontrolled. This would be justice. Calculated. Public. Irreversible. They'd taken everything from Dad in the shadows. I would give it all back in front of everyone who'd ever known them. I copied every file carefully. 3 separate USB drives. One for the lawyer, one for the police, one for me. Then I sat down and started planning my next move. But first, I needed one more piece of evidence. I needed proof from the airport. And I knew exactly who to ask. Over the next 2 weeks, while they sipped cocktails under the Greek sun, posting sunset photos and ancient ruins on social media, I became someone I'd never been before. A detective, a legal strategist, a father and son building a case not just to win, but to ensure they would never hurt anyone again. Day 3. I had the footage from my hidden cameras. I had the pills analyzed and documented. Now I needed to build something unshakable, something that would stand up in any court. I drove back to Millbrook Regional Airport, my hands steady on the wheel. Officer Martinez was at the security desk, the same man who'd been there the day they left us behind. "Mr. Crowley," he said, standing when he saw me. "You doing all right? Your family enjoy that trip. Actually, I need your help. About that day, October 15th, I need security footage from Terminal C between 8:15 and 9 a.m. He frowned, uncertain. "That's not standard procedure. Officer, my family abandoned my 80-year-old father at this airport. He's in a wheelchair. They left him sitting at that gate and flew to Greece without him. I need proof of what they did, not for revenge, to protect him legally, in case they try something else when they return." Martinez's expression changed immediately. He'd been there that morning. He'd seen Dad sitting alone in that wheelchair, confused and waiting. "Give me an hour." 63 minutes later, I walked out with a USB drive clutched in my hand. 3 camera angles, check-in counter, waiting area, departure gates, every moment of the betrayal captured in high definition by the airport's own security system. Day 4. Richard Cole had been Dad's lawyer for 30 years. He knew our family well, had drafted Dad's original will years ago, handled the hardware store sale, attended family dinners. I laid it all out on his polished desk. The pills in their unmarked bottle, the medical report from Dr. Reynolds, the footage from my cameras, the airport security recordings, everything. He watched in complete silence. When the video of them forging Dad's signature ended, he removed his glasses slowly and rubbed his eyes. "Sinclair, this is conspiracy to harm an elderly person, fraud, document forgery, elder abuse, financial exploitation." "Yes." He leaned back in his leather chair heavily. "But it's also your wife, your children. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? There's no going back." I didn't hesitate even for a second. They stopped being my family the moment they left him at that airport. Over the next 3 days, Detective James Barrett, examined every frame of footage meticulously. Barrett was a forensic video analyst, retired police detective turned private consultant. Cole had hired him specifically to verify the footage wasn't edited or manipulated in any way. He spent 72 straight hours checking metadata timestamps, file signatures, pixel analysis, everything technical. "It's real," he finally said, looking exhausted. "No edits, no manipulation, no tampering. This is exactly what we're seeing. Planned harm and fraud documented over months." By day 8, Dr. Reynolds had drafted an official medical report on her letterhead. Patient Robert Crowley, age 79, exhibits symptoms consistent with prolonged exposure to neuromuscular blocking agents administered without medical supervision. Progressive muscle weakness, loss of motor control, and paralysis of lower extremities occurred gradually over 6 months, coinciding directly with administration of unidentified pills by family member Amanda Crowley. Medical opinion: this decline was not natural aging. It was caused by external chemical force. Day 10. Officer Martinez had connected me with Detective Jennifer Walsh from the Elder Abuse Unit at the County Police Department. I brought everything organized in folders. She reviewed the entire file for 2 hours without speaking once. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Crowley, this is one of the most thorough case files I've ever seen brought to this unit. We'll need to wait until your family returns to make arrests. But when they land," she tapped the folder firmly, "we'll be ready. I promise you that." Through all of this investigation and preparation, I kept Dad's routine completely normal. Breakfast together, TV shows, sitting by the window watching birds. Sometimes he'd ask, hopefully, "When are they coming home, son?" "Soon, Dad, very soon." He didn't need to know yet. Didn't need to carry the terrible weight of what they'd done to him. That was my burden now. My responsibility. Day 14. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from Catherine. "Flight lands tomorrow at 2 p.m. Can you pick us up? Howden Turion Startzel?" I stared at the message for a long time. The audacity. The absolute nerve. They'd abandoned him like trash and now expected me to chauffeur them home like nothing had happened. I texted back, "I'll be there," but they had no idea what I actually meant by those words. That afternoon, I found Dad sitting by the window watching birds at the feeder we'd installed together. Sunlight streamed through the glass, catching the silver in his thinning hair. He looked peaceful, content. Just an old man watching birds on a quiet afternoon. He deserved peace, and I would make sure he got it, even if it meant tearing apart the family I'd spent 56 years building. Because some things matter more than keeping the peace. Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The night before they returned, I had everything ready. The lawyer briefed, the police coordinated, the evidence organized, all arranged, all documented, all waiting. But I also had to make a final decision. I could hand everything to authorities quietly and let the system handle it behind closed doors. Or I could take one more step. Something bigger, something public, something they would never escape or forget. And sitting there in the dark, listening to Dad's gentle snoring down the hall, I knew exactly what I was going to do. But first I had to see their faces when they walked through that airport door. They walked through the front door at 4:15 on October 30th, with laughter still on their lips and stories about clifftop restaurants overlooking the Aegean. Amanda set down her carry-on, the leather gleaming under the hallway light. Catherine followed, skin bronzed from 2 weeks under the Mediterranean sun, scrolling through photos. Scott nodded without looking up, flicking through work emails. None of them looked toward the living room. None of them asked about my father. I stood in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in hand, watching them unpack their vacation, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "How was the flight?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Long," Catherine said, slipping off her sandals. "But worth it. You should have seen the view from our villa." Amanda grinned, pulling out trinkets. We brought back lucumuds from this little bakery. They were incredible. I nodded slowly. That's nice. Where's Dad? Amanda asked, glancing around. Living room, same place he's been. She walked past me. I followed, watching as she stopped and stared at my father sitting in his wheelchair by the window. He didn't look up. I thought he'd be at the care facility by now, Amanda said quietly. I met her eyes. Why would he be? Because we talked about this Sinclair. Catherine stepped in, crossing her arms. You said you'd look into places. I did look. I decided he's staying here. Scott set his bag down. That's not really your call to make. He's my father, I said. That makes it exactly my call. Catherine's jaw tightened. He needs professional care. No, you all decided. I stayed. Amanda's voice softened in that practiced way. We're not trying to be cruel. We just want what's best for him. Keeping him here isn't fair to him or to you. I almost laughed. Instead, I turned toward the kitchen. Dinner's at 6. You should unpack. Dinner was stranger than I'd imagined. They sat around the table like nothing had changed, passing plates of roasted chicken and potatoes, talking about the places they'd been. The monastery, the wine tasting, the bar where they'd met a couple from Toronto. They laughed. They gestured with their forks. My father sat at the far end, silent. He barely touched his food. Just stared down at his plate, his hands trembling. Dad, you okay? Amanda asked. He didn't answer. She exchanged a look with Catherine. He's been like this a lot lately, hasn't he? He's been fine, I said. Fine. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Look at him. He's barely functioning. I set down my fork carefully. He's here. He's with family. That's not the same thing as being cared for, she said. I didn't respond. I just cut another piece of chicken and ate it slowly, watching them. That night, I stayed in the hallway outside Catherine's room. I heard their voices through the door. We need to move him soon, Catherine was saying. Before Sinclair digs in any deeper. He's already dug in, Amanda replied. Then we push harder. We tell him it's not sustainable. We bring up the cost. If we sell the house, we can cover a decent facility and still have something left over. How much do you think the house is worth? Oh, at least $800,000, maybe more if we list it right. A pause. Then Amanda spoke quieter. What about Sinclair? What about him? He made his choice at the airport. He can live with it. I stepped back from the door, hands clenched. I'd heard enough 2 weeks ago when I'd watched the footage of them planning this exact conversation. I walked to my father's room and opened the door quietly. He was awake, sitting up in bed, the photograph of my mother on his lap. His eyes were red. They didn't ask about me, he said softly. Not once. I sat on the edge of the bed. I know, Dad. They went to Santorini, to the place your mother and I met. And they didn't even tell me about it. I know. He looked down at the photograph. I gave them everything. I just wanted them to be happy. I know you did. He was quiet. Then he looked up, his voice breaking. What did I do wrong? I reached over and took his hand. Nothing, Dad. You didn't do anything wrong. I stayed with him until he fell asleep. Then I went to my office, closed the door, and picked up the phone. Richard Cole answered on the second ring. It's me, I said. We're moving forward. You're sure? I'm sure. I want to do it publicly. I want everyone to see. That's a risk, Sinclair. I don't care. My father deserves to be seen. He deserves to know that someone stood up for him. Cole was quiet. Then he said, when? April 23rd, his 80th birthday. We'll throw a party. 500 guests, family, friends, people from the community, everyone who ever knew him. And you want to do it there at the party. Yes. I want them to see what they did. I want them to hear it. I want my father to hear it. Cole exhaled slowly. All right. I'll make the arrangements. But you need to be ready. This won't be easy. I know, but it's the right thing. I hung up and sat in the dark, staring at the 3 USB drives on my desk. One for Cole, one for the police, one for me. In 5 months, on April 23rd, my father would turn 80. And on that day, in front of 500 people, my daughter would stand to give a toast, just like she'd always wanted. She'd smile. She'd talk about family and love, and then I would show them the truth. But until then, I would wait. I would play the role of the obedient husband, the quiet father. I would set the table and make the coffee and push my father's wheelchair while they made their plans, because they thought I was weak. They thought I would let this go. They had no idea what was coming. Planning a party for 500 takes time. Planning a reckoning takes longer. In the 5 months between October and April, I lived 2 lives. On the surface, I was the obedient husband who worked his logistics job and came home to make dinner. I smiled when Catherine talked about her real estate deals. I nodded when Scott complained about his sales quotas. I asked Amanda about her design projects and listened while she rattled off details about her latest client's kitchen renovation. But underneath, I was building something they couldn't see. Something they would never forget. November came first. I booked the Millbrook Grand Ballroom, the largest venue in town. Capacity 600. I'd need 500. I made a list. Every person who'd ever known my father, old business partners from Crowley Hardware, suppliers, customers who'd become friends over 40 years, Martha and John Peterson, the neighbors who'd lived next door for 3 decades, Pastor Allen from the church, every member of the Rotary Club my father had once belonged to. 500 invitations, gold embossed, formal. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 80th birthday of Robert Crowley, April 23rd, 2024, 7:00 p.m., Millbrook Grand Ballroom. Catherine looked over my shoulder while I addressed the envelopes. That's quite a guest list. You sure it's not too much? He deserves it, I said. He spent his whole life helping people. It's time they honored him. She shrugged. Well, it's good for my real estate business anyway. I kept writing addresses. December brought the next step. I met with a video production company, small and discreet. I told them I needed a 15-minute tribute video for my father's birthday. So, we have security camera footage, home videos, recorded conversations. Can you edit it into something impactful? The editor, a woman named Claire, nodded. Absolutely. Is there a specific message? The facts, I said. Just show the facts. We worked for weeks. Cutting, timing, making sure every second was clear, undeniable. By January, the video was finished. 15 minutes. 5 segments. Perfect. In January, Amanda came to me with an idea. My dad. I'd really love to give a speech at Grandpa's party. You know, about family, about what he means to all of us, about sacrifice and love. I kept my face neutral. That's a wonderful idea, Amanda. I'll make it really special. Maybe I'll even cry a little. She smiled already, imagining the applause. I'm sure you will, I said. In fact, why don't you speak first, right after dinner? Set the emotional tone. Perfect indeed. Throughout the winter, my father and I kept a routine. Every evening after Catherine and the others had gone to bed, we sat in the living room. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just watched old movies. One night he asked, "Why are you being so kind to me, son?" I looked at him, frail, tired, but still here. Still fighting. Because you deserve it, Dad. You always have. I feel like I'm waiting for something, but I don't know what. I squeezed his hand. You're waiting for people to see you again, and they will. Soon. By March, the bills started coming in. Catering, venue rental, sound and lighting equipment, fresh flowers. It added up. Catherine confronted me over breakfast. Sinclair, this party is costing a fortune. Nearly $40,000. Is it really necessary? It's his 80th birthday, I said calmly. Yes, it's necessary. Well, I hope he appreciates it. Though honestly, he probably won't even remember it happening. I smiled. Oh, I think everyone will remember this one. 2 weeks before the party, I met Officer Martinez and Detective Barrett at a coffee shop on the edge of town. Here's how it works, I explained. The video starts at 7:30. It runs 15 minutes. When it's over, I'll signal you, I'll step off the stage and nod toward the entrance. That's when you move in. Martinez leaned back in his chair. You're sure you want to do it this way, publicly? They did everything to him in the dark, I said. It's only fair the consequences happen in the light. Barrett tapped his pen against his notebook. We'll have units outside, plainclothes officers inside. When you give the signal, we'll act. 1 week before April 23rd, I walked through the ballroom alone. Staff were still setting up tables, chairs, lights. I stood on the stage where Amanda would speak, where I would interrupt her. I tested the microphone, the screen, the sound system. Everything worked perfectly. I ran through the plan in my head one last time. Guests arrive. Dinner. Amanda begins her speech. I take the microphone. The video plays. Police enter. Arrests. Simple, clean, irreversible. The night before the party, I went into my father's room. He was lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling. Big day tomorrow, he said quietly. The biggest. I'm nervous, son. I don't like crowds anymore. I sat on the edge of his bed. I know. But tomorrow isn't about the crowd. It's about you. You're finally going to be seen the way you deserve to be. He reached over and took my hand. Thank you for everything. For staying with me that day at the airport. For not giving up on me. My throat tightened. I'd do it again, 1,000 times. April 23rd. 2024 arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the ballroom was ready. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, centerpieces of white lilies, my mother's favorite flower, 500 chairs, one stage, one large screen, one USB drive in my jacket pocket. Amanda was backstage rehearsing her speech about love, family, and sacrifice. Catherine was greeting guests, playing the role of the perfect daughter-in-law. Scott was at the bar, already drinking, and I stood by the tech booth, calm, focused, ready. Everything I'd planned for 5 months was about to unfold, and there was no turning back. The ballroom shimmered like something out of a fairy tale. 500 faces smiling and laughing, champagne glasses catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. My father sat at the head table in his wheelchair, overwhelmed by the attention, but trying his best to smile. And Amanda stood at the podium in a deep red dress, microphone in hand, ready to deliver the performance of her life. She had no idea I was about to deliver one of my own. 7 o'clock. The doors opened and they came in waves. Old friends, business associates, neighbors from decades past. All of them here to honor a man most of them hadn't seen in years. Martha Peterson was one of the first. She rushed over to my father's wheelchair, tears already forming in her eyes. Robert, you look wonderful. 80 years old and still going strong. My father smiled weakly, his hands trembling slightly. Thank you, Martha. It's a lot of people. You deserve every one of them. John Peterson added, shaking my father's hand firmly. Best neighbor we ever had. One by one they came to greet him. Some he remembered clearly, some he didn't. But all of them had stories. You fixed my door when I couldn't afford a locksmith. You gave my son his first job at the hardware store. You were always there when we needed you. My father's eyes welled up. He wasn't used to being seen like this anymore. Wasn't used to mattering. Backstage, Amanda stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting her dress carefully. Deep red, fitted, elegant. Her hair had been done professionally that afternoon. This was her moment to shine. I walked past, pretending to check the sound equipment. Nervous? I asked casually. She grinned. Not even a little. I've been practicing all week. This is going to be beautiful. People are going to cry. I'm sure they will, I said quietly. Is the tribute video ready, the one you made? Ready. It'll play right after your speech. Oh, perfect. I'll set the emotional tone, and then the video will seal it. She checked her lipstick one last time in the mirror. This is going to be such a special night for Grandpa, I smiled. More special than you can imagine. Dinner was served at 7:30. Roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, spring vegetables. The kind of meal my father would have loved, simple, honest food. But he barely touched his plate. He kept looking around, nervously fidgeting with his napkin. I leaned down close. You okay, Dad? I don't understand why all these people are here. I'm nobody special. You're somebody to every person in this room. You just forgot. But they didn't. He looked at me, confused and uncertain. What's going to happen tonight, Sinclair? The truth, Dad. Finally the truth. Catherine was in her element, moving from table to table, shaking hands, handing out business cards like candy. Yes, Crowley Realty. We specialize in historic properties. She wore a navy dress and pearls, playing the devoted daughter-in-law perfectly. Scott sat at the bar already on his third drink. He didn't bother talking to anyone, just stared into his glass like it held all the answers to questions he didn't want to ask. At 8 o'clock, the MC, a local radio host I'd hired, stepped up to the podium with a warm smile. Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. We're here tonight to celebrate an extraordinary man, Robert Crowley, 80 years of life, 40 years of service to this community through his hardware store, a husband, a father, a grandfather, a friend to many. Applause filled the room like a wave. And now to say a few words about her grandfather, please welcome Amanda Crowley. Louder applause. Amanda glided onto the stage, smiling, waving gracefully. She looked radiant, confident, in control. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Her voice was warm, professional, perfectly modulated. I can't tell you what it means to see all of you gathered to honor my grandfather. She paused for effect, letting the emotion build. Grandpa Robert he's the foundation of our family. The man who taught us what love looks like, what sacrifice means, what it is to put others before yourself. I stood near the tech booth watching intently. My hand rested on the USB drive in my pocket. When I was little, Grandpa used to take me to the hardware store. She spun a beautiful story about childhood visits, about him teaching her to fix things, about family values passed down through generations. None of it was real. She'd been to the store maybe twice in her entire life, but the crowd was eating it up. Some people were already tearing up, dabbing at their eyes with napkins. And that's why tonight, on his 80th birthday, I want to say, Grandpa, we love you. We're so grateful for everything. I stepped onto the stage. The room went silent. Amanda froze mid-sentence as I walked toward her with steady, deliberate steps. Dad, what are you? I gently took the microphone from her hand. She let it go, too surprised to resist. I turned to face the audience. 500 faces staring at me. Confused, curious, waiting. I'm sorry, Amanda, but I think our guests deserve to hear the real story tonight. Amanda's face went white. Dad, what are you doing? I looked past her. At Catherine, frozen at her table, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips. At Scott, gripping his whiskey glass. At my father, sitting in his wheelchair, watching me with wide, uncertain eyes. Then I looked back at the crowd. 3 months ago, my father spent $22,000, his entire life savings, to take his family on one last trip. To Santorini, the place where he met my mother 58 years ago. He wanted to stand on those cliffs one more time before he turned 80, and he wanted all of us there with him. The room was dead silent. You could hear people breathing, But not all of us went, because some of us decided he didn't deserve to be taken along, that he was too much of a burden. I turned toward the tech booth, nodded once. The lights dimmed slowly. Behind me, the massive screen flickered to life, and on it appeared the first image security camera footage from Millbrook Regional Airport, dated October 15, 2023, at 8:32 in the morning. Amanda's face filled the screen, pushing my father's wheelchair through the terminal. The entire ballroom leaned forward in their seats, and I knew there was no stopping it now. Hold on, before the video plays, I have to ask. What would you do if you had undeniable evidence against your own family? Would you expose them publicly like this? Or would you choose a different path? Tell me in the comments. Your answer says a lot about who you are, and I genuinely want to know. Quick reminder: what follows includes dramatized details for storytelling purposes and may not represent factual accounts. If you'd prefer not to continue, this is a good place to exit. All right, here's what unfolded on that screen. For 15 minutes, 500 people watched in absolute silence as the darkest secrets of my family played out in high definition on the massive screen. No background music, no dramatic voiceover, just raw footage, raw audio, raw truth, captured frame by frame. And when it ended, there was no applause, only gasps, only tears, only the sound of a family's reputation collapsing in real time. The screen showed security camera footage, black and white, timestamp in the corner, October 15th, 2023, 8:15 a.m. My narration began calm and measured. 3 months ago, my father, Robert Crowley, made a decision. He wanted one last trip with his family to Santorini, the place where he met my mother 58 years ago. He paid for everything, $22,000 from his life savings. He asked for one thing: that all of us be there with him. The footage showed Amanda pushing my father's wheelchair to a seating area near the windows. Audio from my phone recording processed and clear. "Dad, Grandpa, just wait here, okay? I'll check everyone in." Cut to Amanda at the check-in counter. 4 boarding passes printed out. Not 5. Cut to Amanda, returning to my father, leaning down. The camera had no audio at this point, but text appeared on screen. She told him there was a system error, that a care facility was coming to pick him up, that it would be for the best. 3 camera angles showed what happened next. Catherine, Amanda, and Scott walking toward the departure gate, not looking back even once. My father, alone, wheelchair by the window, clutching the photograph of my mother. Waiting. The ballroom went dead silent. Some people raised their hands to their mouths in shock. My narration continued. But the abandonment was only the beginning. The screen switched. New footage, a bedroom, night vision. April 12, 2023, 7:32 a.m. Amanda walked into my father's room with a bright smile. "Good morning, Grandpa, time for your vitamins." The camera captured her turning away, swapping pill bottles quickly, handing my father a blue pill. A montage. 6 months of mornings. The same routine. The same pills. Day after day after day. Then the video cut to Dr. Patricia Reynolds, her testimony recorded professionally. This substance is a neuromuscular blocking agent. When taken over months, it causes progressive muscle paralysis. It is not available over the counter. Its use requires intent. A timeline appeared on screen. January, Robert walking independently. March, requiring a cane. May, requiring a wheelchair. Text overlay. Amanda Crowley administered these substances daily for 6 months. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" Martha Peterson shot to her feet, hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Night footage. July 28, 2023, 11:47 p.m. My father slumped in a chair, drugged. Catherine and Amanda walked in with a stack of papers. The audio was crystal clear. Catherine, hold his hand steady. Amanda, got it. He's signing. The camera zoomed in on the documents. Last will and testament. Property transfer document. Power of attorney. All signed by my father's limp hand, guided by Amanda's fingers. Audio continued. Scott. How much longer do we have to keep this up? Amanda laughing softly. When he's gone, we won't have to deal with the wheelchair situation. And Dad, meaning me. He's too soft, won't suspect a thing. The ballroom erupted into murmurs. Angry whispers spreading like wildfire. Living room footage. August 20th, 2023, 10:15 p.m. Catherine. So we're agreed. We leave the old man at the airport. Amanda, it's the cleanest way. Tell staff he wandered off. By the time anyone questions it, we'll be in Greece. Shati, what if Dad doesn't go along? Amanda Sinclair. He won't suspect anything. He's too trusting, too soft. Many people were standing now. Some crying, some shouting. How could you do that? Monsters, call the police. The screen faded to a photograph of my father. Younger, smiling, healthy, before the wheelchair, before the harm, before the betrayal. My voice this time live, not recorded. I stepped back to the microphone, and this man raised me, taught me to trust people, to trust family. And I pointed toward Amanda frozen on stage. They repaid him by trying to erase him. $22,000. That's what he spent to take them to the place where love began. And they couldn't even let him come along. The screen went black. The ballroom erupted. Not with applause. With outrage. We'd arrest them. How could you do that to your own family? That poor man. Martha Peterson rushed to my father's wheelchair, throwing her arms around him. Robert, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. We had no idea. Amanda grabbed the microphone from my hand desperately. This is lies. He edited those videos. I looked her straight in the eye. Calm, steady. No, Amanda. You put yourself here the moment you decided your grandfather's life wasn't worth as much as a vacation. Her face crumbled. Dad, please. Catherine stood at her table, pale, shaking her head repeatedly, like she could deny reality itself. Scott had already started edging toward the emergency exit at the back of the ballroom. I looked out at the ballroom. 500 faces, some angry, some devastated, some just stunned into silence. I turned back to Amanda. 3 months ago, this man stood before us and said he wanted one last trip with his family. He wanted to honor the woman he loved. He spent every last penny he'd saved. And I pointed, you threw him away. Then you tried to take everything he had left. His dignity, his home, his legacy, while still smiling at him every morning. The ballroom doors burst open suddenly. Not guests leaving, but 3 people entering with purpose. Officer Martinez, Detective Barrett, and a 3rd officer I didn't recognize. They walked down the center aisle, badges visible on their belts. The entire room fell silent. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone except Amanda, who was still on stage, still trying to explain, still not understanding that explanations wouldn't save her now. Amanda Crowley, you're under arrest for conspiracy to harm an elderly person, fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. The words echoed through the ballroom like a judge's gavel. Final. Irreversible. 500 witnesses. No way to deny it. No way to escape. Justice at last. Officer Martinez stepped onto the stage. He looked at Amanda, then at me. I nodded once. I, Amanda Crowley, he said in a clear, authoritative voice that carried through the silent room. You're under arrest for conspiracy to harm an elderly person, fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. He pulled out his handcuffs. Amanda staggered backward, her red dress catching the stage lights. No, No, this is Dad, save me. Tell them this is crazy. I didn't move, didn't speak. Martinez stepped forward. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The handcuffs clicked into place around her wrists. Amanda's legs buckled. 2 officers had to hold her up. Detective Barrett moved through the crowd toward Catherine's table with deliberate steps. Catherine Crowley, you're also under arrest as an accomplice to fraud and elder abuse. Catherine's face went white as paper. Sinclair, please. We didn't mean to. You meant every second of it, I said quietly. The 3rd officer intercepted Scott at the exit. Scott Crowley, don't make this harder than it has to be. Scott didn't resist. Just stared at the floor as they cuffed him, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As they led Amanda toward the door, she twisted around, screaming, that this is your fault. You turned them against me. You ruined everything. I stepped into her line of sight. No, Amanda, you did this. Every pill, every forged signature, every lie. That was you. I just made sure everyone finally saw it. She lunged forward, but the officers held her back firmly. I hate you. When I know, I said. But I loved Grandpa more than I ever feared losing you. As the police escorted them out, the ballroom erupted not in chaos, but in support. People swarmed around my father's wheelchair. Martha and John Peterson hugged him. Old customers from the hardware store shook his hand. We're so sorry, Robert. You didn't deserve this. You're a good man. Attorney Richard Cole stepped onto the stage beside me. The MC handed him the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Cole announced. I want to clarify what happens next. Legal proceedings will be pursued. Amanda Crowley faces up to 20 years for the severity of her actions. Catherine and Scott Crowley as accomplices face lesser sentences, likely 2 to 3 years each. He paused, looking out at the crowd. But tonight isn't about punishment. It's about honoring a man who spent his life serving this community. Robert Crowley, every person in this room knows what he's done for them. And now finally he knows he was never invisible. He was seen. He is loved. And he always will be. The entire room stood, and they applauded. Not for the spectacle, not for the arrests, but for my father. I wheeled my father out of the ballroom, away from the noise, away from the lights, into the cool April night. Stars filled the sky. The parking lot was quiet. My father looked up at me. Why did you do all this, son? Because you stayed for me when I was young. You taught me how to be a man, how to trust, how to love. Now it's my turn to stay for you. His eyes filled with tears. I thought I was alone. I thought no one saw me anymore. I knelt beside his wheelchair. I see you, Dad, every second, and I always will. He reached out his hand. I took it, and for the first time in months he smiled. A real smile. The trial lasted 3 months. I didn't attend most of it. Cole handled everything. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Amanda, 20 years. Conspiracy to harm, fraud, elder abuse. The judge called it one of the most calculated acts of family betrayal he'd ever seen. Catherine and Scott, 2 years each. Eligible for parole after 18 months. Their faces appeared on the news. Their names became synonymous with cruelty in Millbrook. The real estate company where Catherine worked fired her immediately. Scott lost his sales job, but my father and we didn't watch the news. We were already gone. That very night, the night of the party, I couldn't stay in that house 1 more minute. Too many ghosts. Too many lies embedded in the walls. I packed 2 suitcases, one for me, one for my father. Where are we going? He asked. Somewhere safe. Somewhere you'll be happy. Uncle Henry's been inviting us to visit for years. I think it's time. My father's eyes lit up. Henry, really? Really? We leave in the morning. The next morning before dawn broke, I loaded the car. My father's wheelchair in the trunk. His photograph of my mother on the dashboard where he could see it. And we drove, 4 hours north, to Riverside County, to a place where no one knew our story yet. Where we could start over, the trial would happen. Amanda, Catherine, and Scott would face justice. But we didn't need to be there to watch. We'd already won. As I wheeled my father outside that night, he said, "I thought I'd lost you too, son. At the airport, when you chose me over them. I thought you'd regret it." I stopped, turned the wheelchair so we faced each other. "I regret Dad choosing you was the easiest decision I ever made. They were my family by blood. But you're my family by choice, by love. And love always wins." 4 hours, 240 minutes through winding roads, past small towns and open fields. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The radio played soft jazz, my father's favorite kind of music. And as the city disappeared behind us and the countryside opened ahead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, Not the fragile kind that shatters when tested, but the kind that comes from knowing you did the right thing even when it cost you everything. We were going to a place where we would be seen, where we belonged. And for the first time since that morning at the airport, I knew we were finally going home. The next morning before dawn broke over Millbrook, my father and I left that city behind. 4 hours, 240 minutes on winding country roads. But those 4 hours beside my father, watching the landscape change from city to open fields, from suburbs to farmland, passed like a heartbeat every mile, carrying us away from betrayal and closer to something that felt like peace. 5 o'clock. The house was still dark. I helped my father into the car, carefully loaded the suitcases into the trunk, and we rolled out just as the first light touched the horizon. Empty streets. No one to say goodbye to. No one to explain to. Just me, my father, and the open road ahead stretching endlessly. I glanced in the rearview mirror as we crossed the city limits. The place where I'd lived my entire life. Where I'd built a family, a career, a life I thought was solid. And I felt nothing. No regret. No nostalgia. Only relief washing over me. The first hour we drove through suburbs, strip malls with their bright signs, gas stations opening for the day, the familiar sprawl of development. Then the landscape opened up. Fields appeared on both sides of the road, barns painted red and white, grain silos rising against the sky, small towns with one stoplight and a single diner. My father watched it all from the passenger seat, silent but attentive, his eyes taking in every detail. "I forgot how beautiful this is," he said quietly. "Me too." We didn't talk about the trial. We didn't talk about Amanda, Catherine, or Scott rotting in their cells. We didn't talk about what we'd left behind in that broken house. Instead, my father told me stories. About when he and Uncle Henry were boys running wild. About the farm their parents used to own. About summers fixing tractors and building tree houses in the woods. "Your mother and I used to drive like this," he said, his voice soft with memory. "Just drive. No destination. Just to be together." I reached over and squeezed his hand gently. "This time we have a destination, Dad. A home." At 9 o'clock, we crossed into Riverside County. A small sign, easy to miss. "Welcome to Riverside County. Population 3,200. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow. A river cut through the valley, hence the name. Everything was lush and green from spring rains, vibrant with new life. "Beautiful," my father whispered. "Yes, it is." Henry's property sat at the end of a long gravel driveway. A small farmhouse, white paint peeling but charming in its weathered way. A red barn, a chicken coop, fields stretching back toward a line of trees. As we pulled up, the front door opened. Uncle Henry stepped outside. He was shorter than my father, stockier. gray hair, wearing a flannel shirt and worn jeans. He looked like a man who'd spent his life working with his hands and was proud of it. And when he saw my father, his face broke into the brightest smile. I helped my father out of the car. Henry rushed over, nearly stumbling in his hurry. "Billy," Henry's voice cracked with emotion. He threw his arms around my father, carefully, mindful of the wheelchair, but tight and full of love. "God, I missed you, brother." My father's eyes filled with tears. "Henry, it's been too long." "Too long." Henry agreed, pulling back to look at his brother's face. He stepped back, studying my father carefully. "You look tired, brother." "I am, but I'm okay now." Henry looked at me. "Sinclair, thank you. Thank you for bringing him home." The farmhouse was small but welcoming. Wood floors that creaked, quilts draped over the sofa, photos on the walls, Henry's late wife smiling, their children grown and moved away, pictures of my father and Henry as boys with gap-toothed grins. "It's not fancy," Henry said, showing us around, "but it's warm, and it's yours for as long as you want it." He'd prepared a room for my father on the first floor, a large window overlooking the fields, a comfortable bed with a handmade quilt, enough space for the wheelchair to move freely. "This is perfect," my father said, his voice thick with gratitude. That evening, the three of us sat on the front porch. Henry made lemonade from scratch. We watched the sun set over the fields, golds and oranges and pinks spreading across the sky like a painting. Henry leaned back in his rocking chair. "So, what happened back there, Sinclair? You sounded different on the phone," I told him. "Not everything, just enough. The airport, the evidence, the party, the arrests." When I finished, Henry was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Justice, finally done." My father looked out at the fields. "Margaret would have loved this view." She would have," I agreed. Henry raised his glass. "To Margaret, and to new beginnings." We clinked glasses. Just lemonade, not champagne. But it felt right. That night, while unpacking in the small guest room upstairs, I found something at the bottom of my suitcase, a sketchbook. Old leather-bound, the pages yellowed. I'd packed it without thinking. It had been sitting in my office closet for years, maybe 30 years. I opened it. The first few pages had sketches from college. A still life of fruit. A portrait of my mother. A landscape of the park near our house. Then blank pages. So many blank pages waiting. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a pencil I'd found in the desk drawer. Outside the window, the fields stretched endlessly under the stars. And for the first time in decades, I felt the urge to create something. Robert looked out at the sunset and asked, "Do you think we'll be happy here, son?" I looked at him, at the peace on his face, at the way the evening light framed him like a painting. "I think we already are, Dad." I didn't draw that night, just held the pencil, stared at the blank page. But the urge was there, quiet, patient, waiting for me to be ready. 30 years I'd ignored that part of myself, buried it under responsibilities, obligations, other people's expectations. But here in this quiet place, I could feel it stirring, not just the desire to create, but the permission to be myself. And I realized this wasn't just my father's new beginning. It was mine too. I hadn't held a paintbrush in 30 years. Not since I was 25, fresh out of college, dreaming of galleries and exhibitions. Then life happened. Marriage, children, bills, mortgages, and art became something I used to do. But here at Riverside, surrounded by fields that changed color with every hour of sunlight, art became something I needed to do. Not for anyone else, but for myself. The first morning I woke at dawn. The sun was just rising, turning the fields gold. I grabbed the sketchbook and sat on the porch. My hand moved almost automatically. Quick lines, the barn, the fence line, the oak tree in the distance. The strokes were rough, clumsy. 30 years of neglect had dulled the skill. But it felt right. My father wheeled himself out onto the porch, a blanket draped over his lap. "What are you drawing?" "The oak tree. But I can't get the shadow right." He moved closer, studying my sketch carefully. Then he said quietly, "Shadow should be longer. Morning sun comes from the east. Tree's shadow should stretch west." I looked at him surprised. "You're right," he smiled. "You used to draw all the time when you were little, on napkins, on the backs of receipts, on anything you could find. Your mother kept them all. I hadn't thought about that in years, but he was right. As a kid, I drew constantly. My mother had kept a box of my sketches in the attic." "Why did you stop?" my father asked. I set the pencil down. "I guess life, work, family. It felt selfish. Like I should be doing something practical. And now I think maybe taking care of yourself isn't selfish. Maybe it's necessary." By the second week, I'd filled the sketchbook completely. Henry drove me into town, a tiny main street with an art supply store run by an old woman named Claire. "Haven't seen you before," she said. "I just moved here. I'm starting to paint again." She smiled warmly. "Well, welcome back to painting. I bought brushes, acrylics, 3 canvases." It felt like coming home. 3 months in, I completed my first real painting. A sunset over the field, golds and oranges and deep purples, the barn silhouetted against the sky. I set it on the porch, stepped back to look at it properly. Henry came outside, stopped dead. "Sinclair, that's really beautiful. Thanks." "No, I mean it. You should display it. There's a little gallery in town for local artists." I shook my head. "It's not for display. It's for the experience." But I kept painting. Fall came. The fields turned amber and gold. I painted them obsessively, every shade, every angle, every time of day. My father sat beside me every afternoon watching. Sometimes he dozed off. Sometimes he just stared at the horizon peacefully. But one afternoon, he spoke clearly. Clearer than he had in months. "Sinclair." I looked up from the canvas. "Do you remember when you were 8? You drew a picture of the hardware store. Said you wanted to paint it on a big sign so everyone could see it." My breath caught. That memory was over 40 years old. "Dad, you remember that?" His eyes were sharp, focused. "I kept that drawing in the bottom drawer of the old desk. Never threw it away." Tears stung my eyes. I had no idea. Of course I kept it. He reached over and squeezed my hand. "You were always an artist's son. I'm glad you're doing it again. Your mother would be so proud." By winter, I had 10 paintings completed. Henry convinced me to display them at the town's gallery. Nothing fancy. Just a small corner. A small sign, "Sinclair Crowley, local artist." 3 sold within a week, to people I'd never met. For modest prices. But it wasn't about the money. It was about being seen again. Not as a husband, a father, or someone's son, but as myself. By spring of 2026, we'd settled into a rhythm. Mornings I painted. Afternoons I sat with my father. Evenings, the 3 of us, me, my father, and Henry, sat on the porch and watched the world turn. My father's health was stable, not better but not worse, just steady. One evening he said, "You're doing really well, son, really well." I set down my brush. "You think so? I know so. You found yourself here. That's worth more than most people ever manage." One afternoon, I felt my father watching me paint and said, "I used to think my life was about the hardware store, about providing, about being useful. But sitting here with you, watching you create, I realized my life was about this, about you, about making sure you had the space to become who you were always meant to be." I couldn't speak, just held his hand while the sunset bathed us both in gold. The gallery asked for more paintings. Claire started ordering supplies specifically for me. People in town began recognizing me not as that man whose family betrayed him, but as the artist who paints the fields. One morning, a young woman came to the farm. She introduced herself as Emma, a reporter from the county newspaper. "I'd like to do a story on you," she said. "About your art, about your journey here." I hesitated. "I don't know if I want to talk about the past." "Then don't," she said simply. "Talk about the present, about what you're creating now." The article ran 2 weeks later. Local artist finds new life through painting. It focused on my work on the farm, on the beauty of starting over. Henry framed it and hung it in the farmhouse kitchen. My father read it 3 times, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so proud of you, son." We lived like that for 2 years. Painting, talking, healing. Sometimes we drove into town for supplies. Sometimes Henry's children visited with their families. But mostly it was just us. 3 men finding peace in a place the past couldn't touch. And I hoped it could last forever. But nothing lasts forever. Not pain, not betrayal. And I would learn not even the quiet moments that feel like home. One morning in late spring, I woke to find my father hadn't come out of his room. I knocked softly. No answer. I opened the door. He was still in bed, breathing shallow, his face pale. "Dad." His eyes opened slowly. He looked at me confused for a moment, then smiled weakly. "Morning, son." "Dad, are you okay?" "Just tired. Very tired." I called the doctor. She came within the hour. After examining him, she pulled me aside. "His heart is weakening. It could be days, could be weeks. But Sinclair, you should prepare yourself." I nodded, unable to speak. That evening, I sat beside his bed, holding his hand. "Dad, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He squeezed my hand weakly. "I know, son. I know." I'd gotten used to the rhythm of our new life. My father by the window, in his chair, watching the light move across Henry's land. Me at my easel painting and repainting those hills, trying to find just the right color. Some days he remembered my name clearly. Some days he called me son, with a gentle smile, as if he'd never forgotten at all. But in early March, something changed. He stopped eating much, stopped asking about the paintings. He slept more, his breathing shallow and uneven. Dr. Reynolds came to the house. She didn't say much, she didn't need to. "It's time, Sinclair," she said quietly. "His body is tired." I nodded. I'd known this day would come. We all had. But knowing doesn't make it easier. We took him to the hospital on March 14th. Henry drove. I sat in the back, holding my father's hand. He looked so small, so fragile. At the hospital, they made him as comfortable as they could. No machines, no extreme measures, just morphine and quiet. I sat beside his bed for 2 days straight, leaving only for brief moments when Henry forced me to eat or rest. On the 3rd day, March 16th, 2026, he opened his eyes one last time. "Sinclair," he whispered. "I'm here, Dad." He smiled. A real smile. The kind I remembered from when I was 8, standing in his hardware store, learning how to fix a lock. "You stayed," he said, his voice barely audible. I squeezed his hand. "I always will, Dad." He closed his eyes, and then he was gone. We buried him next to Margaret, in a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of Millbrook. Henry arranged everything with careful attention to detail. No crowds, no speeches, just me, Henry, and a few old neighbors who remembered Robert Crowley as the man who ran the hardware store on Main Street for 40 years. Martha and John Peterson came. They hugged me, said nothing, and left flowers, white roses, my mother's favorite. Officer Martinez stood at a distance, nodding respectfully. He'd been there the day we'd been abandoned. Now he was here to witness the end. I stood by the grave long after everyone had left, staring at the headstone. Robert James Crowley, 1945 to 2026, beloved father. He stayed when it mattered most. Henry put his hand on my shoulder firmly. He was proud of you. I didn't trust my voice then, so I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. A week after the funeral, I got a call from Richard Cole. Sinclair, we need to go over your father's will. Can you come to Millbrook? I drove the 4 hours alone, the scenery blurring past the windows like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. At Cole's office, he handed me a manila folder worn at the edges. Your father updated his will 2 years ago, right after the arrests, Cole said. He was very clear about his wishes. I opened it with trembling hands. To my son, Sinclair Crowley, you were the only one who stayed. You were the only one who saw me not as a burden, not as an inheritance, but as a father. I leave you the house on Maple Street, the hardware store building now closed, and the entirety of my estate valued at approximately $2.7 million. To Catherine Scott and Amanda, I leave the small rental property on Oak Lane. They are required to vacate the main house within 30 days of this will being read. Use the money wisely, son. Build something good. Something lasting. I stared at the words, my throat tight with emotion. Cole cleared his throat. There's more. He pushed another document across the desk. Your father also established a fund, $500,000, to be used for a foundation in his name. He wanted it to support orphaned children and families affected by elder abuse. I looked up, stunned. He set it up 6 months before he passed, Cole continued. He said Sinclair will know what to do with it. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. My father had planned for everything. Even in his final months, weakened and dying, he wasn't thinking about revenge, wasn't thinking about justice. He was thinking about legacy, about creating something that would outlast him. I drove back to Riverside that night, my mind spinning with possibilities and grief. Henry was waiting on the porch when I arrived, rocking gently in his chair. How did it go? He asked. I sat down beside him, exhausted. He left me everything, the house, the store, $2.7 million. Henry whistled softly. That's a lot of responsibility. And a foundation. I added, my voice breaking slightly. For orphaned children. For survivors of abuse. $500,000 to start it. Henry studied me carefully. What are you going to do? I looked out at the land, the place where I'd found painting again, where I'd found peace, where I'd found myself. I'll do what Dad wanted, I said quietly. I'll build something good. Something that helps people who've been hurt the way he was hurt. Something that gives them a second chance. Henry nodded slowly, understanding. You'll need a bigger place then. Can't run a foundation from my guest room. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Yes. I think I will. The idea was already forming in my mind. Not just a foundation, but a center. A place where elderly people who'd been abandoned or abused could come, where they could be seen, be valued, be cared for, where families could learn what real love looked like, and attached to it an art therapy program. Because I'd learned something in these 2 years, healing doesn't just happen through medicine. It happens through creation, through beauty, through finding purpose again. The Robert Crowley Center, I said aloud, testing the words. Henry smiled. He'd like that. I pulled out my sketchbook, the same one I'd brought from Millbrook 2 years ago, now filled with drawings and ideas. I turned to a blank page and began to sketch a building, open and welcoming. Windows facing the fields, studios for painting, gardens for walking, rooms filled with light. I'll need architects, I said, drawing faster now. Contractors, staff, it'll take time. You've got time, Henry said, and you've got resources. And most importantly, you've got the right heart for it. I looked at him. Will you help me? Of course, he said, without hesitation. Your father was my brother. This will be my way of honoring him too. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my sketchbook drawing plans until dawn broke over the fields. My father had given me everything. Now it was time to give it back, not to him, but to everyone who needed what he'd needed, to be seen, to be valued, to know they weren't alone. I'll do what Dad wanted. I'll build something good. Henry nodded slowly. You'll need a bigger house then, I smiled. Yes, I think I will. I stood in front of the house on Maple Street for the first time in 2 years. It was still the same white paint blue shutters, the big oak tree in the front yard where I used to climb as a kid, but now it felt different. Catherine Scott and the others had moved out weeks ago as required by the will. They took their belongings and left without a word. Good. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing against the bare walls. This house had been full of lies, full of betrayal, full of whispered conspiracies in the dark. But it didn't have to stay that way. I pulled out my phone and called Richard Cole. Richard, I'm ready. Let's start the foundation. Over the next 2 months, Richard and I established the Robert Crowley Foundation with careful planning and clear purpose. Mission: to provide safe housing, education, and emotional support for orphaned children and families affected by elder abuse. We used the $500,000 my father had left, plus an additional $200,000 from the estate, to get everything started properly. By June, we had a home, the renovated Maple Street house, now bright and welcoming. We had a part-time social worker named Janet who specialized in trauma. We had school partnerships and therapist connections throughout the county. We had volunteers, including Martha and John Peterson, who came every week to help with meals and activities. Richard looked over the final paperwork, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Your father would be so proud, Sinclair. In July, I welcomed the first child, Emma, 12 years old. She arrived with a single backpack and eyes that had seen too much. She was quiet and guarded, standing in the doorway, like she expected to be turned away at any moment. I showed her her room, painted soft yellow, facing the oak tree, where light streamed in every morning. Huh? Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I knelt to her eye level. Because someone once did it for me, and I want to pass it on. Over the next month, 4 more children arrived, each with their own stories, their own pain, their own hope. Lucas, 10 years old, loved to draw. I gave him my old sketchbooks and watched his eyes light up. Sophia, 8, was shy and spoke so softly you had to lean in to hear her. Noah, 6, was loud and full of energy, running through the house like a small tornado. Lily, 5 years old, carried a stuffed bunny everywhere and wouldn't let it out of her sight. The house that had been silent and cold suddenly filled with laughter and life and the sound of feet running up and down the stairs. That evening, I cooked spaghetti for everyone. We sat around the big dining table, the same table where Amanda, Catherine, and Scott had once whispered their conspiracies about my father. But tonight was different. Tonight was beautiful. Emma helped set the table, carefully placing each fork and knife. Lucas told jokes that made Sophia giggle behind her hand. Noah spilled juice across the tablecloth, and Lily tried to help clean it up with her tiny hands. I looked around at their faces. These children had every reason to be angry at the world, to be closed off and bitter. But instead, I felt peace radiating from this table. Mr. Crowley, Emma said quietly, call me Sinclair. Thank you for letting us stay. My throat tightened with emotion. You don't have to thank me, Emma. This is your home. For as long as you need it. She smiled, small but real. I thought of my father, of what he'd said in the hospital. You stayed. Yes, Dad, I stayed. And now I'm helping others stay too. I converted my father's old office into an art room filled with natural light. Lucas and I painted there on weekends, our brushes moving across canvases while soft music played in the background. I hung my favorite painting, The Sunset over Riverside County, on the main wall. Next to it, I placed the photograph of my father and mother in Santorini, 1965, young and in love. Below it, a small brass plaque, Robert James Crowley, 1945 to 2026. He stayed when it mattered most. Emma came in one afternoon and looked at it carefully. That's your dad. He looks happy. He was. I said, my voice thick. And he taught me something important. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who stays, who shows up, who remembers your name when everyone else forgets. I received a letter from Henry in October. His handwriting was shaky but clear. He was proud of what I'd done, he wrote. Proud that I'd turned the house into a home, turned pain into purpose, turned my father's death into something that would help others live. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside my father's photo. I stepped outside onto the front porch and watched the children play in the golden afternoon light. Emma pushed Lily on the swing, her laughter rising into the air. Lucas drew on the front steps, his tongue stuck out in concentration. Noah and Sophia chased each other around the oak tree, their shouts echoing through the neighborhood. The betrayal, the airport, the arrests, the trial, my father's death, all of it had led to this moment, to this family, to this home built on the ruins of what had been destroyed. Sinclair realized then that the story was never about revenge. It was about healing, about rebuilding what had been broken, about creating a new circle of love from the ashes of betrayal. His father hadn't left him money. He'd left him a mission, and Sinclair was fulfilling it one child at a time. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, I sat at the dining table with my father's old notebook, worn leather cover soft under my fingers. On the last page, in his shaky handwriting, he'd written, "The best way to honor the past is to build a better future." I smiled and looked around the house, drawings taped to the refrigerator, toys scattered on the floor, backpacks hanging by the door. This was my father's legacy. Not the money, not the house, not even the foundation itself. These children, this laughter, this second chance at family. I texted Henry, "Thank you, Uncle, for everything. I'll visit soon with the kids. They'd love to see the farm." Then I opened my journal and wrote, October 15th, 2026. 5 children, 1 house, 1 foundation in Dad's name. Amanda is still in prison serving her sentence. Catherine and Scott are out, but we don't speak. I don't need to. I don't need closure from them. I found it here. I have everything I need right here in this house full of noise and life. Dad was right about everything. We don't honor people by holding on to anger. We honor them by staying, by showing up, by building something good from the wreckage of something terrible. And that's exactly what I'll do, every single day, for the rest of my life. Because 20 minutes at an airport taught me something: family isn't who you're born to. It's who you choose, who chooses you back, who stays when everyone else walks away. And I will always, always stay. I closed the journal and looked at my father's photograph one last time. I stayed, Dad, just like you taught me. When I think about everything that happened, I realize how easily I could have lost what mattered most. Don't be like I was blind to the warning signs, too trusting when caution was needed. Grandpa stories like mine remind us that family betrayal cuts deepest, but they also teach us that healing is possible. God gave me 3 gifts through this journey. First, He gave me the strength to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. Second, He opened my eyes to see that justice without compassion is just another form of cruelty. And third, perhaps most importantly, He showed me that family betrayal doesn't have to define us. We can choose to build something beautiful from the ashes. My father used to say, "God doesn't waste our pain." I didn't understand that until I held Emma's hand on her first day here, until I watched Lucas discover his love for painting, until I saw 5 broken children become a family. Grandpa stories aren't just about the past. They're blueprints for the future. In my view, the greatest legacy we can leave isn't money or property, but the choice to love when hate would be easier, to stay when leaving would be simpler, to build when destroying would be faster. Family betrayal taught me that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, but choice does. And with God's grace, even the darkest moments can become the foundation for something lasting. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring grandpa stories, and hit the share button to help others find hope in their own struggles. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Please note, this is a fictional story crafted for educational purposes. If this type of content isn't for you, feel free to explore other videos that better match your interests.